Welcome to Behind the Lines, coming to you from the socialist, Marxist lines of Washington State. It's a crazy liberal petri dish for the rest of the country, folks. Stay up to date with all the great news right here. Thank you for tuning in to Net News Network Washington State. I'm John Washington, and this is Behind the Line, coming to you from behind the socialist, Marxist, sometimes communist lines of Washington State. Today's report is about the assault on gasoline here in Washington State. Governor Jay Inslee and Washington Democrats, who have the majority in our state legislature, are trying to push through a number of bills that will increase taxes and limit gas-powered vehicles, all in the name of green energy. Inslee's Climate Commitment Act is one of his proposals for his 2021 to 2023 $500 billion budget. Inslee is proposing a bill to create a comprehensive climate program. This will meet the statewide greenhouse gas limits in RCW 70A.45.020, improve climate resilience, and reduce climate change impacts on communities and ecosystems. The bill, the Climate Commitment Act, establishes principles and standards for a comprehensive climate program that uses the best available science, provides the necessary authority, supports an equitable and inclusive transition, and invests in climate-related programs, activities, and projects that we need to meet the challenge. To achieve these priorities, the Act will cap greenhouse gases. The bill establishes cap on greenhouse gas emissions for the state's largest emitting industries. It authorizes the Department of Ecology to administer a program that ensures industries comply through the sale, tracking, and accounting of greenhouse gas credits, which are called allowances. It will also invest in community and climate resilience. Proceeds from the sale of allowances, taxes, will be directed into the Climate Investment Account. These funds will then go toward investments that support clean transportation, natural climate resilience solutions, clean energy transition and assistance, and emissions reduction projects. All projects funded from the account must meet strong labor standards and support environmental justice and equity goals. The new buzzwords for the state of Washington. Put environmental justice and equity at the center of climate policy. Investments from the Climate Investment Account must undergo an environmental justice analysis. This will make sure that funds are directed toward eliminating environmental harm and economic and health disparities for vulnerable populations and overburdened communities. The analysis will also help distribute the program's benefits equitably in the communities around the state. Well, what does this mean for you? Higher taxes, of course. Although he failed to mention this during his 3-day multiple press conferences where he introduced this ridiculous budget, the only thing he alluded to during these press conferences was that large companies emitting large amounts of carbon would have to pay carbon taxes to offset pollution, because somehow paying money eliminates greenhouse gas. Anyway, of course they are counting on that because it would bring in billions of dollars to the state. And no doubt these companies will pass those costs on to you, the consumer. He talked about requiring a clean fuel standard and electric cars. This is where you will probably feel the biggest hit in the near term. Per Governor Inslee, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Washington and accounts for 45% of statewide emissions. To meet our greenhouse gas limits, Inslee says we must transition to clean fuels, aggressively electrify our transportation infrastructure, and help more people take advantage of options such as high-speed rail, electric vehicles, electric ferries, and buses. Because Washington's electric grid is among the cleanest and least expensive in the nation, transitioning to a clean transportation is one of the best ways to cut carbon pollution. Inslee says a clean fuel standard is a market-based approach to cut greenhouse gas emissions from transportation fuels. The governor supports legislation to enact a clean fuel standard that would require fuel providers to clean up our fuel supply by reducing the amount of carbon in fuels, a 10% reduction by 2028 and 20% reduction by 2035, and further reductions needed to meet the 2050 greenhouse gas limit. Inslee proposes $2.85 million for the Department of Ecology to implement a clean fuel standards program. The proposed program is technology neutral, which means the requirement can be achieved by any mix of alternative fuels that overall meets the average standard. A clean fuel standard will spur manufacturing investment and create jobs processing cleaner fuels here in Washington. By adopting a clean fuel standard, Washington would join the rest of the West Coast, British Columbia, Oregon, and California, that are all successfully operating CFS programs. Of course, requiring fuel manufacturers to make special fuel for one or two particular states is going to increase costs for the consumer for those one or two states. You're going to feel that at the pump. And not surprisingly, California has the highest gas prices in the country, on average of $3.50 a gallon for regular, and this is per AAA. Oregon has an average price of $2.80 a gallon, and Washington currently is an average of $2.94 a gallon, and that's the third highest in the country without all these new rules and the new gas mixture that Inslee wants. What wasn't talked about during the budget press conferences was the new gas tax being proposed. If approved, Washington State would have the highest gas tax in the nation. The House Democrat Transportation Plan would spend $26 billion over the next 16 years, but because it doesn't prioritize existing roads and highway maintenance, there would still be a preservation and maintenance backlog of over $1 billion. To raise this huge sum, they propose a gas tax increase of 10 cents the first year and another 8 cents the following year. However, they would tie these increases to the Consumer Price Index, CPI, in effect making sure the gas tax continues to increase without any further legislative analysis or action. In addition, their plan places a carbon fee on industries of $15 per ton the first 2 years, $20 per ton the next 2 years, and then $25 per ton after that. This extra cost will undoubtedly be passed on to consumers. Combined with the previously mentioned gas tax increase, drivers could be paying $1 more per gallon each time they fill up. And this doesn't include the governor's low carbon fuel standard that recently passed out of committee. This could add another 50 to 60 cents per gallon. So in effect, you could be paying $1, $1.50, $2 tax per gallon at the pump, making Washington the highest tax state for gas in the United States. Nearly $4 per gallon by AAA's report. But really, it's going to be more like $5 per gallon in places like Seattle, where the average price of gas is already around $3.90 per gallon. On top of all these ridiculous taxes, Inslee also wants to eliminate gas-powered vehicles entirely. Inslee says to increase the number of people who use electric vehicles and improve electric vehicle equity in Washington, we need to increase electric vehicle awareness. The governor's budget provides $1.5 million to fund a program that promotes electric vehicle benefits and incentives, especially to residents with low income. Inslee says Washington State would vault to the forefront of the movement to purge fossil fuels from automotive fleets under bills introduced in the legislature to ban registration of new gas and diesel-powered vehicles in 2030. That's right, they want to ban the registration of new gas-powered and diesel-powered vehicles in 2030. That's only 9 years from now. House Bill 1204 and Senate Bill 5256 cover new model passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks and would kick in at the start of the next decade. The bills call for these vehicles to be registered in Washington State to use an electric battery or hydrogen. They put no sunset date on the ownership and sale of 2029 or earlier model gas and diesel-powered vehicles. Electric cars, if charged by power generated from sources such as wind, solar, nuclear, or hydro, can be a key part of the global push to reduce carbon emissions that drive climate change. The push to electrify cars gained momentum last month when General Motors announced a goal of ending the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035. So, how many hydrogen cars are you aware of on the market today? They do exist, but in California, for example, as of 2017, there were 29 hydrogen filling stations. They had a goal of 80 by 2020. And for a state that size, that is not many options to fill up. Also, hydrogen is 30% more expensive than gas. Yeah, you aren't just pouring a bottle of water into it to fill it up. So to fill up a car the size of a Prius, it costs about $60. Washington currently has no hydrogen stations, with one slated to be built this year. It took a $1.9 million grant to fund the construction of this one station. Sounds very affordable, doesn't it? Electric vehicles are also gaining popularity and becoming more affordable, and they tout all the benefits and money to be saved by driving one. However, that will reduce the taxes collected from gas taxes, and you know the state is going to come up with some other electric vehicle fee, road tolls, or pay per mile toll, all of which have already been discussed. You know, something that could be done to immediately reduce greenhouse gas emissions from cars is to reduce congestion and the amount of time cars sit idling in traffic. Of course, this has not been talked about at all. The Seattle area has some of the worst traffic in the country, and nothing is being done to reduce the amount of time drivers sit in traffic. Instead, they want to talk about making you take mass transit or drive a newer, green, expensive car. Not everyone can afford to buy a new vehicle. And of course, these policies will hit the people the state claims to be concerned about the most: low income, minorities, and people of color. In Governor Inslee's pursuit of climate justice and being fair and equitable, he's going to put enormous strains on a population of people already struggling. Not to mention the state is already reeling financially from the economic impacts of COVID and the business closures and high unemployment from lockdowns. The state coffers have been depleted, and they are seeking tax dollars to fill them back up. This is not the time to be implementing a slew of new taxes. People and businesses need to get back on their feet. Yes, climate issues need to be addressed, but we need affordable, sensible, and proven alternatives in place before we jump the gun and start eliminating what works. We can't put the cart before the horse, so to speak. I would encourage you all to reach out to your legislators and let them know you oppose any new taxes right now, and that we do not need any more financial oppression, because that's what this is, financial oppression. Thank you for watching. This has been a special report from Net News Network Washington State, Behind the Line. You can find additional content and podcasts from Behind the Line on most podcast platforms. I'm also on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn.